Purpose. For some, it's about finding meaning in your life and work. For me, it's about mayonnaise. That's right, mayo. See, in January, a fund manager and one of the largest shareholders in Unilever wrote an angry letter to the CEO complaining that the company's focus on purpose-related marketing was a distraction that was hurting profits. He wrote that a company that feels that it has to define the purpose of mayonnaise has, in our view, totally lost the plot. It's a classic Wall Street he said. On one hand, you have the CEO, whose lofty ambition is that the purpose of mayonnaise is fighting food waste. On the other hand, a rather dour investment manager who believes that the purpose of mayonnaise is salads and sandwiches. It's hard to say who's right, because these days, everything in business that used to be about profits is suddenly about purpose and sustainability and impact. You can't even find a job posting, particularly targeting young people, that doesn't talk about the social impact it creates. And yet, every single year, our experts tell us that our problems are getting worse, including climate change and inequality. So, if purpose is everywhere, why is it so hard to find? The answer lies in the economic systems that we rely on. To find more purpose in our work, we have to first fix the rules of the game. Today, too often, profit beats purpose because that's how the system was designed to operate. And it's something I know from the inside. My career was an odd journey across the purest extremes of profit and purpose. It began on the profit side. I became the youngest partner at a New York investment firm with a focus on what's called vulture or distressed investing. We would buy the debt of struggling companies at large discounts. Either the company recovers and pays us back, or it tips into bankruptcy, in which case we would fight against other stakeholders to take over the company and turn it around. It's pretty vicious stuff. But for some reason, at some point, I realized that where purpose meant trying to get a place in the Hamptons, it wasn't enough for me. And my change came through the example of a close friend, Michiel. When he was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, he dropped his finance job and decided to focus on his own purpose. And while fighting stage 4 melanoma for 2.5 years, Michiel founded a charity for education in Kenya, where my parents were born and raised. Michiel and I shared a common desire while we were in business school to eventually find more meaning in our work. But his diagnosis meant that it was no longer someday. It was now or never. And watching his example sparked in me a process to find my own purpose that ended with me returning home to Toronto, moving into an apartment on top of a noodle house over on Baldwin Street, and deciding to plow my life and savings and all of my time and attention into creating a technology nonprofit, Rumi. Rumi's mission is inspired by the goal of helping anyone to realize their innate potential by making building new skills easy and engaging and fun. We figured out that we could leverage global volunteer networks to help us to create short, free micro courses that are optimized for mobile phones and are the same length as the average Instagram session, 6 minutes. Today, Rumi is used by people in over 200 countries and territories, including thousands of women and girls in Afghanistan who are learning from anywhere safely on their mobile phones in the local languages. In my new world, purpose was everywhere. It was a bit like the Unilever CEO's refrigerator. No one got that. Purpose was everywhere, but it felt a bit more real. And sort of at that time, I started to notice that the social trends, even as I found purpose, the broad social trends were going in the wrong direction. And that's when I was approached to help drive sustainable investing at BlackRock, the largest investment firm on the planet. Having worked on both extremes of profit and purpose, I was tapped to merge the two in an alluring new approach from Wall Street, where we get to keep making money and save the world at the same time. As it turns out, I think no one's going to be too surprised by this. in the end, it was a lot of profit, but the purpose bit was kind of felt like marketing. Most sustainable investment products are based on the flawed theory of divestment, or not owning the shares of, say, an oil company. The problem with applying cancel culture to financial markets is the same with applying it to ideas. You don't defeat something by pretending it's not there. The best way to think about competitive markets is that they're like competitive sports. Whether you're competing for profits or for points, these are well-regulated competitions where there are rules enforced by impartial referees. And what I saw was that in capitalism today, far too often it pays to be irresponsible. There's a reason that Facebook addicts us to their apps and Exxon pollutes. It makes money. And even to the extent that they incur fines, these are like parking tickets. I mean, the costs, the rewards of doing business in that way massively outweigh the costs. So I decided to leave the industry again. And I remember telling a friend that it felt like we were responding to a slow-moving cancer by giving the patient wheatgrass juice. It's well marketed in green, but it's not going to stop the disease. What would stop the disease? Well, in a competitive sport, when the game devolves into dirty play, we call in the refs to fix the rules. In capitalism, that would mean asking governments and regulators to use their special powers to fix the rules of the game for everyone. And therein lies the dangerous con of blindly equating profit with purpose, is that it's allowed business lobbies to argue that any government intervention in the economy, even to protect the public interest or the environment, is somehow this interference on a magical free market that will solve all our problems left to its own devices. Now, when an ex-banker tells you something is a con, you should probably listen. And the idea of saying that the government is interfering with the market or the free market makes about as much sense as saying that the NBA is interfering in a Raptors game by setting it up in the first place and hiring referees to enforce the rules. Capitalism exists because of the preconditions created by government, property rights, courts, similar structures that protect our shared interests and make business possible. It needs fixing, but it's ours. After I left the industry, I started to notice that they were ramping up their marketing around ESG and sustainable products. And after I worked on a study that showed that this was misleading the public and delaying overdue government reforms, I decided to speak out. I began writing publicly. I wrote a scathing essay entitled "The Secret Diary of a Sustainable Investor" that went viral and caused a bit of a stir. And I'm not going to lie, it felt kind of daunting to pick a fight with some of the most powerful people in the world. But I feel then, as I feel now, that there is a moral imperative, especially when the clock is ticking, to act quickly and act honestly. The point of the essay was that, first of all, people in the financial services industry either know this won't work or they're about to figure it out. Secondly, that any business leader that is out there claiming that we can create massive systemic change and address challenges like climate change through individual voluntary actions alone is not only acting irresponsibly at this point, they're lying. Just think of COVID. COVID was a systemic curve that science told us to flatten infections. Climate change is similar. It's a systemic curve that science is telling us to flatten emissions. It just moves a bit slower. And just as epidemiologists told us the government reforms we needed, many of them inconvenient, like closing schools, in order to flatten the infections curve, leading economists have told us for decades the kinds of government policy reforms we need in order to flatten the emissions curve. We just don't do them. Why? Because it's not profitable. Today, business leaders stand on stages and they claim to believe that climate science is real and that they want to fight inequality. And at the same time, their companies contribute to these problems. They use marketing to deceive us about the negative impacts of their business. And worst of all, many of them actively lobby and pay politicians to delay and scrap the kind of reforms that actually would address these problems. Put another way, they're paying the refs. This kind of duplicity lowers public faith in the system. Less faith in the system means less of an investment in fixing it. It's a vicious cycle. Younger folks today see a system that is not responding to the long-term challenges that they will eventually have to deal with. Today, there are two generations alive that no longer believe in capitalism: Gen Z and millennials. And can we really blame them? If every version of a sport that you see looks dirty and terrible, eventually you figure there's no way to fix this. It's a great idea from our business leaders if they believe that they want capitalism to go in the long term the way of toe wrestling. So I decided to speak out when I realized that 2/3 of Americans and 2/3 of Canadians believe that the system is rigged to benefit the richest and the powerful. They were looking for answers from insiders. And what I could see was this dangerous placebo that was doing nothing more than delaying, amplifying the cost of inaction, and transferring them to the youngest and the poorest in the world. So, working with partners, we launched a site, fixtherules.org, that uses the simplest form of learning possible, microlearning, to help people understand just how and why we need to fix the rules of the game. And it all comes down to, above all else, three main things. First, we cannot be fooled into believing that our individual actions alone can create the kind of systemic change required without also mandating that everyone, including large corporations, operate differently also. Second, we cannot be fooled into believing that our major power is as consumers. The kinds of broad-based systemic reforms we need mean that your power as voters and citizens is far more important because you can influence the laws of the land. How you vote matters much more than whether or not you decide to use a paper straw. And finally, we cannot be fooled into answering inconvenient truths with convenient fantasies. We've had a long enough time now to know that relying on profit-maximizing corporations to voluntarily forego profits and leave money on the table and out of the pursuit of the public interest is not working. And when relying on good sportsmanship doesn't work, it's time to call on the refs. We have to remember that our success will be determined not by the leaders, but by the laggards. So the latest new responsible brand or company won't do it. We need them all to be doing the right thing. But a note of optimism, if we work on this together and we fix the rules of the game properly once and for all, there's a chance of building a fairer system, a more accountable system, and one that actually respects the civil rights of the youngest and the poorest in the world. A brave new world where, above all else, all mayo has purpose. Thank you.